Well, guys, welcome to the Pulse of Miami Church. If this is your first time here, let me take this opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Todd, and I'm the pastor here at this church. And today, I'm going to make a confession to you. I said yes to Jesus when I was 7 years old. Okay, and it was a true commitment of faith from me. However, as I was growing up, and I'm talking clear into my adulthood years, there would be times where I would doubt that God even exists. What? The pastor doubted that God even exists? Well, yeah, like as I was growing up, as I got older and older, even into my 20s, there would be times, have you ever thought about it and you're like, is this real? Is God really real? And one of the reasons why I had the doubts is that there's so few people that seem to actually believe in God. Have you noticed that? Out in society, for the most part, people just don't seem to believe. There's a lot of people who are atheists. They refuse to believe in God. And it's okay, but the things that are most true, people believe in cars, and we know that they're true. And we know that they work. People believe in planes. We know that they fly, and for the most part, they don't crash. We believe in these things, and they are true, and it's this general consensus. But for whatever reason, when it comes to God, and most people, they don't believe that He's real. And when I say that, it's not just that people deny that God exists. I mean, there's people of other religions, but it's not God. It's not, they believe in these other gods, but it's not our God. And then there's a bunch of people who claim Christianity, and they say that they believe in Jesus, but that they believe in a different Jesus. And then you've got people who actually come to church, and you know that they don't believe, right? And so the question that I wrestled with, and I'd like for us to wrestle with today, is if God is real, why do so few people believe in Him? Okay, what's the reason behind that? And today we're going to continue our study into 1 Kings. And actually, Joshua, if you could help me out real quick. I want to hand these out to everybody here. We're actually going to make 1 Kings. We're going to kind of skip through a lot of stuff. And I'm giving you guys a chart of all of the kings of Israel. Okay, so I put it up here. You'll get this. Actually, if we can go to the next slide real quick. It's actually pretty cool. So on the top here, what you're going to see is you're going to have the first 4 kings of Israel. Now that's when Israel was united as a kingdom. So all 12 tribes of Israel were together at this time. That's when you have King Saul, okay, his son Ishbosheth. Then you have David, and then you have King Solomon. There was 4 kings that were part of the united Israel. But then after Solomon, it actually divided into 2 different kingdoms. Okay, the northern 10 tribes divided from the southern 2 tribes. So the northern tribes were known as Israel or Samaria, and the southern tribes were known as Judah. Okay? And what I like about this, the reason I selected this one is it's color-coded. Right? So for those of you who like things nice and organized, it's color-coded. And if it's in red, it's because the king did evil in the sight of Yahweh. If it's yellow, they were kind of neutral, or they did a little bit of good and a little bit of bad. And then if it's green, they were a good king that honored Yahweh. Right? So if you kind of take a step back and you look at the whole thing, you're like, wow, there's a lot of red on this paper. Right? There's only a little bit of green. There's a lot of red, a little bit of yellow, and just a few kings that really followed God. Another thing that I want you to notice is the southern kingdom over here, they were the ones with the green. There's no green in the northern kingdom. Right? So we're going to skip over a lot of these kings. I'm not going to go chapter by chapter and go through every single one of these kings because a lot of them are just, quite frankly, uninteresting. However, About 7 kings down on the the right hand side, we're going to come across King Ahab. We're going to camp out on King Ahab for a few weeks. Now, why are we going to camp out on King Ahab for a few weeks? Well, in 1 Kings chapter 16, it says, starting in verse 30, it says, "And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of Yahweh, more than all who were before him." So you've got bad guys, and then you've got supervillains, right? And I'm going to be honest with you. You go, "Well, Todd, why are we spending so much time on the bad guy?" Because a good story has got to have a good bad guy, right? And I'll be honest with you, I do love these stories, even though I don't love Ahab. Now, the question is, what exactly was it that Ahab did that was so bad? Next verse. Verse 31. "And if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat." Okay, I like the way that the biblical author said this. This is kind of like, remember Jeroboam? He made all these different temples, and the people started to sin against Yahweh because there was all these different temples. The author was like, well, if Jeroboam was bad, Ahab was like, "Here, Jeroboam, here, hold my beer. I'll show you real bad," right? So what was it that he did that was so bad? He took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians. Now, if you have studied, if you've been in Sunday school for any length of time, that name Jezebel should send shivers up your spine. Okay? I do not recommend, if you're like, "Wow, that's a pretty name," do not name your child that name. Okay? Because Jezebel is arguably probably one of the most evil women in all of the Bible. Now, what makes her so evil? Well, who's her dad? Ethbaal. Do you guys see a name within the name there? Baal. B-A-A-L. Baal is the competitor to Yahweh in the Old Testament. Okay, so when they were there was always should we worship Baal or should we worship Yahweh? They believed in many gods, and so they thought that Baal was was in charge of all the other gods. And then the people who believed in Yahweh go, no. Yahweh is all powerful, not Baal. And so it was always a competition between the two. And there's something that I learned from the class that we did. This actually carries over into the New Testament as well. You guys remember when Jesus was casting out demons and they said, well, the only reason that he can cast out demons is because he's Beelzebub. Remember that weird name, Beelzebub, in the New Testament? And it's a reference to Satan? Well, they're saying the only reason that he can cast out demons is he was the one that sent the demons there to begin with, and so then he casts them out. And Jesus makes a mockery of them. Well, Beelzebub, or Beelzebul, B-U-L, is a transliteration from Hebrew to Greek of Baal, Baal to bull. And so this idea of Baal, he's in competition with the true God. Just like in the New Testament, Satan is in competition with the true God. Okay, so are you guys understanding that? So when it says that her dad is Ethbaal, her dad's name meant with Baal. The reason why he was successful is because he worshipped Baal. So what is she going to do as the daughter of Ethbaal? She went and served Baal and worshipped him. And she led the whole nation to do that. Verse 32. He, meaning Ahab, erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal. So he made an altar and he surrounded it with a whole temple, which he built in Samaria. That's the capital of the northern kingdom. Verse 33. And Ahab made an Asherah. What is an Asherah? An Asherah is an idol. And that's how you worship a goddess by the name of Ashereth. And he did more to provoke Yahweh, the God of Israel, to anger, provoke him to anger than all the kings of Israel were before him. Okay? So Ahab's a bad guy. Now, Did Ahab accomplish a lot? Yes, he accomplished a lot. But the authors of the Bible are saying, okay, but if you want to read all about all the stuff that he accomplished, fine, but what we're judging him on is the way God would judge him. And yeah, he made the northern kingdoms powerful, and he actually resurrected or had a new city of Jericho built. Remember Jericho with the walls that fell down? He actually built a new Jericho, which was a strategic thing, but it was actually forbidden for him to do, and he did it anyway. And so Ahab is the bad guy. Now, what's interesting about Ahab is even though he was this horrible person, Yahweh's still in control. And so Yahweh sends this guy, and you got to remember this guy's name. His name is Elijah. He sends a prophet by the name of Elijah, and he comes up to King Ahab and he says, hey, there's going to be a famine in the land, and it's not going to stop until I come back. And so he disappears. Now, meanwhile, while he disappeared, Jezebel is putting to death all the prophets of Yahweh. She's putting them to death. Wherever she can find them, they're trying to hide them to keep them safe. She keeps finding them and she keeps killing them. But they can't find Elijah anywhere. And so all of a sudden, years later, Elijah shows up. And in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 17, it says, when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, is it you, O troubler of Israel? He goes, is that you? And the way Ahab saw Elijah is he thought that he was the evil guy. You were the one who said that we have a famine. And now we've had a famine for years, and then you don't show back up to take off the curse, basically. Verse 18, but Elijah answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you have, in your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of Yahweh, and you followed the Baals. This famine is not a result of me, King Ahab. This famine is a result of you and your evil wife. And so he says, I'll tell you what, let's settle this thing. Why don't you get all the 450 prophets of Baal, and let's meet at Mount Carmel, and let's settle this once and for all. King says, sure. So he goes and he gathers all the 450 prophets of Baal, and then the people hear about this, so the people start showing up on Mount Carmel. Verse 21. I love this story, guys. This is a great story. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you go limping between two different opinions? If Yahweh is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. But the people did not answer a word. Why? They weren't worshiping Yahweh anymore. They didn't know what to say. And Baal wasn't doing anything. By the way, Baal was the god of thunderstorms. So it's like they keep worshiping Baal so that they can get rid of this famine, but it's not working. So they don't know what to say. So verse 22, then Elijah said to the people, even I only, am left a prophet of Yahweh. Right? Like I'm the only prophet of Yahweh that's actually standing in front of you. Ahab would have killed him, but he was afraid that if he would have killed him, the famine would have continued indefinitely. Right? And so he says, I'm the only prophet here from Yahweh, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Okay? I'm really outnumbered. So let's do this. Verse 23. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, and cut it into pieces, and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. And I will prepare the other bull, and lay it on wood, and I will put no fire on it. Verse 24. And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of Yahweh, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people answered, it is well spoken. Like, that's a great idea. Okay? And when it says fire, it means lightning, right? Because that should have been easy for the God of the thunderstorms to send lightning. And so the people are like, hey, this is great. Not only is there a showdown here, that's going to be entertaining. Number 2, we're going to figure out who's the real God. And if a lightning bolt hits, maybe we can get some rain in this joint. Right? So they were going, man, this is going to be amazing. So they said, let's do it. Verse 25, then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose you for yourselves one bull and prepare it first, for you are many, and call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it. Now I want you to notice how Elijah is giving them all the advantage. You select whatever bull you want, right? There's 450 prophets of Baal here. Baal is the thunderstorm guy. I mean, this should be a layup for them. So in verse 26, and they took the bull that was given them, and they prepared it, and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us. There was no voice. No one answered. And they limped around the altar that they had made. So they're doing their little rain dance around the altar, and they're doing it all morning long until noon. Nothing happens. Now at this point, this is my favorite part of the story, right? At this point, Elijah begins to mock them. Now I know in our culture today, it's like, oh, you're not, but let me tell you, this is pure trollery. It's awesome. I think we should be like, we're not worthy. Elijah does. So he's watching them do this. Verse 27, and at noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, cry aloud, for he is God. Like, scream louder. Maybe he can't hear you because he's a God. He's way up there, right? And then he says, either he is musing. Maybe he's deep in thought. That's why he can't hear you. Or he is relieving himself. Maybe he's on the toilet. I mean, maybe he just can't hear you because he's on the toilet. Or he's on a journey. Or he's asleep and must be awakened. Come on, just cry out a little bit louder. I love it. Mad trollery. Verse 28. And so they got mad at him. And they cried aloud. They cried louder. But then they brought out their secret weapon. They started cutting themselves with swords and lances until blood gushed out on them. Now, I've spent a little bit of time kind of trying to put us all on the Mount Carmel together. What I'd like to do is just kind of put a pause on that scene. Let's back out of that for a second. Why were they cutting themselves? Well, they were cutting themselves because they believed that through the spilling of blood that they could get better get the attention of the gods. Okay? And the reason I wanted to pause here for a second is because I wanted to show you that in every false religion or every false belief, there are little nuggets of truth in there. Okay? Because in the true religion of the Old Testament, they did sacrifice animals. There did have to be the spilling of blood of animals for the forgiveness of their sin. And that was actually pointing to the New Testament, where Jesus would shed his blood. His blood would be spilled for the forgiveness of sin. In fact, we're going to take the Lord's Supper at the end of our service today in memory of what Jesus did for us. And so you see that there's a little nugget of truth there, but it's fake. Theirs is fake because their gods require them to cut themselves, that their blood be spilled. But our God said, no, I'm going to come from heaven to earth. I'm going to put on flesh. I'm, Jesus Christ, and his blood would be spilled for us. In the same way, back then, there were several of those false religions that they would require child sacrifice. We've talked about it at length. Molech would actually require infant sacrifices. Chemosh, you could sacrifice them even if they were an adult, but if they were your child, you could sacrifice them to Chemosh. But there's a nugget of truth there because in the New Testament, God would send his only son, allow his son to be sacrificed for us. But notice in the false religion, they want your children. In the real religion, God gives his own son for us. I just wanted you to know that as you interact with people who believe different things, you're going to find little nuggets of truth, but it's fake. It's a counterfeit. It doesn't mean what it does in our faith. Let's zoom back into the mountain. Mount Carmel. They're cutting themselves. They're chanting. Verse 29. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation. And that's the evening sacrifice. But there was no voice. No one answered. No one paid attention. So now they've been doing this all day. Their voices are probably gone. They're probably tired because they bled a lot, right? So it's time. It's winding down. So verse 30. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come near to me." And all the people came near to him. And he repaired the altar of Yahweh that had been thrown down. So he probably asked them to help. Apparently there was an altar there before that they had worshipped Yahweh. He's rebuilding this altar. Verse 31. Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of Yahweh came, saying, Israel shall be your name. Okay? He rebuilds the altar with 12 stones. Understand this. He is making a political statement based on a theological truth. Because remember, back then, there was 10 tribes in the northern kingdom, 2 tribes in the southern kingdom, and they didn't like each other, and they wanted to be separated. And he was making a political statement. He says, we should be unified because we all belong to Yahweh. He was making a political statement based on a theological truth. I found that interesting. Verse 32, and with the stones he built an altar with those 12 stones in the name of Yahweh. And then he made a trench around the altar as great as would contain 2 seahs of seed. About how much is that? That's about if you took 3.5 gallons of seed and poured it out. Okay, so it was a substantial little trench going around. Now why did he build that? Verse 33. And he put the wood in order, and he cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. But this is where he goes off the rails. And then he said, fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. So we're not talking about jars. We're talking about, like, back then, those huge jars. So think about, like, a huge bucket. Maybe like a 10-gallon bucket. So I want you to take 4 buckets of water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. So they went, they poured it on. Verse 34. And then he said, do it a second time. So they did it a second time. And then he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. Verse 35. And the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with water. It was so soaked that it was filling up that trench with water as well. And the people are probably staring at it. There's no way on God's green earth that this is ever going to light on fire. And then Elijah, he doesn't dance. He doesn't scream. He doesn't cut himself. Verse 36, and at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and just said, O Yahweh, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I'm your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Verse 37, answer me, O Yahweh, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Yahweh, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Now I believe, because I've grown up watching movies, I believe that in this moment he prays, and then nothing happens, right? There's a long, awkward pause, slightly longer than it should be. And then all of a sudden you hear, you know that sound that it makes like right before a lightning strike hits? Boom! That's exactly what happens. Right? Verse 38. Then the fire of Yahweh fell, boom, and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. This wasn't just any old lightning bolt, guys. This was a massive lightning bolt. Verse 39. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and they said, Yahweh, He is God. Yahweh, He is God. I have a question for you. Was Yahweh or was God more real after all of them said, Yahweh, He is God? Was He more real after they realized it? Or was He just as real before they realized it? Even when they didn't believe in Him, He was still real. I hope you see where I'm getting at, right? It didn't matter whether they believed in Him or whether they didn't believe in Him. He was still real. And it was up to them to discover who He really was and to truly believe in the truth. Verse 40, and Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal, let none of them escape. And they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. Whoa, wait a minute. That was a little rough. Yeah, kind of. Remember, we don't live in their day. And remember that all of the prophets of Yahweh had been slaughtered. Except for him and maybe 100 others they didn't know about. And I also want to remind you that people had died because of that famine. And that whole famine, the prophets of Baal were just saying, well, the reason we're having this famine is that you don't have enough faith in Baal. But the truth of the matter, it was their fault that the famine was there to begin with. So people's family members had died because of their lies. And so they were put to death. Verse 41, and Elijah said to Ahab the king, go up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of the rushing of rain. It's over. The story goes on, and it's actually pretty funny. He keeps praying and praying and praying, and finally there's this little cloud that starts, and he goes, you better watch out, it's about to pour. And everybody's like, really? And then all of a sudden it's just like, boom! I mean, this giant storm breaks out, and the famine is over. Now you would think that after that kind of a display, and I used to have that conversation with God, if you would just show up in a way that only you could, like people would believe. You know what really happened? Ahab went back, told his wife what happened, and all she heard was he killed all of the 450 prophets of Baal. She put a bounty on his head and tried to go after him. Now, we're going to see the rest of the story of Ahab and Jezebel over the next few weeks. But a lot of those people stopped believing. But here's what I want to point out to you. Whether they believed or not, God was still just as real. Right? And I want to encourage you that we may walk out of here and God has placed us in a place where there's so few people that believe. You know, our friends from Alabama, maybe there's a few more percentage-wise people that believe in Birmingham, Alabama than do in Miami, Florida. But whether people believe or not, it doesn't matter. Because God is real. And He wants to be real in your life. So if God is real, why do so few people believe in Him? Because reality does not depend upon belief. Let me say that again. Reality does not depend upon belief. And the problem that we have in our society is we've been fed this garbage our whole lives, even since we were watching Disney movies, the good ones. Right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Like Peter Pan. Peter Pan was one of the really good ones, right? But what happens with Peter Pan? Tinkerbell almost dies. Do you remember that? And then they go to the audience and they go, oh no, if you guys just believe, she'll come back to life. And they get the audience to believe, and then she comes back to life. Right? It's what we call the Tinkerbell effect. It actually has a name. It's called the Tinkerbell effect. But you know what? There are plenty of people that still believe that Elvis and Tupac are hanging out together somewhere in Podunk, Florida. I don't care how much they believe, they bringing those guys back to life. Right? Belief, reality does not depend upon belief. I wanted to read to you. Perhaps you're familiar with. I'm going to try to sing it. I'm not going to sing it. when you wish upon a star. Makes no difference who you are. Anything your heart desires will come to you. Right? Don't laugh. That was bad. But that's what we've been fed ever since we were little kids. Look, and you know what? There's a little bit of truth to it. Okay, can I be honest? I was actually meeting with a young man this week, and we were talking about his future. And he was like, you know what? I don't know if I can ever get there, because he didn't believe in himself. And so it is true that you have to believe first. But then there's this little thing called hard work that has to happen between the day that you believe that you can do it and then until it actually happens. And the hard work is hard. And getting up every morning, it's hard, right? They skip over that part. You just believe long enough. No. Reality does not depend upon belief. Belief in something fake doesn't make it any less fake. There's plenty of There's plenty of kids that believe in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. I was so afraid that there was going to be a little kid here. Yeah.
He's not real?
Yeah, he's not real. Sorry. Well, and that brings me to a really good point. When they're little kids, when you're talking about, how old is Luna? 5. When you talk about a 5-year-old girl, okay, it would be pretty cruel and heartless for me to be Santa Claus is not real, But it would also be cruel and heartless if she was 18 years old and I didn't say, hey, by the way, that whole Santa Claus thing, like nobody tells her, right? But that's the society that we live in. I mean, right now there are men who are dressing up like women and are believing that they're women. And there are women who are dressing up like men and believing that they're men. And here's the thing, okay? At some point, we have to say, okay, they're adults, and we have to tell them the truth. And it's not mean to tell people the truth. Here's the thing. Reality does not depend upon belief, and I don't care how much you want to believe that you're the opposite gender. You're not. Yeah, but how do you help a kid that thinks that they're the opposite gender? Well, same way that we helped. Sorry, Rebecca, I should have talked to you beforehand. My daughter, when we were on vacation one time, she decided she wanted to be a boy. She says, no longer call me Rebecca, call me Beck. Right? And we were supposed to call her Beck. And it was funny. And we laughed. And then we would purposefully call her Rebecca. I'm Beck. Right? It was this whole funny thing. But you know what happened? The end of the vacation happened. And we came home and we're like, Rebecca, you're not a boy. And she's okay with it today, right? At some point you have to ground your beliefs in reality, not try to change reality with your beliefs. There was a song came out about 20 years ago, I Believe I Can Fly. You can sing that as much as you want, but please don't throw yourself off of it. What does all this have to do with God? If I was going to be honest with you, even after being a pastor, I've really wanted this Jesus thing to work out in people's lives. Right? And when somebody who was coming to my church or somebody who I was ministering to, when they started thinking, when life started getting hard and they go, you know what, how could a good God allow this bad thing to happen? I would go home and not be able to sleep at night. And if I were to be honest with you, there was a portion of my heart that was like, if they stop believing, then it's going to hurt my faith. Maybe God isn't so real. But what I finally come to the conclusion is that, you know what? God has shown himself in my life so many times that when somebody's struggling, listen, if Jesus doesn't work out for you, that's not my fault. And I know Jesus enough to know that it ain't his fault either. Right? And I have this faith in Jesus Christ. And whether you believe or you don't believe, it doesn't affect my faith. Because reality does not depend upon belief. Besides, Philippians chapter 2 says that there will come one day when every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, because everybody will finally say, no, he really is. Read with me Matthew chapter 23, verse 12. This is our memorization verse. Read it out loud with me. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. If you exalt yourself and say, well, I don't believe it, and so therefore it's not true, then God is going to humble you. But if you humble yourself and you go, you know what, reality may be different from my belief, and I'm going to try to look for reality, God will exalt you. Let's close in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for today. Lord, we live in a society that really thinks that belief is important. But what's really important is the truth. Your word, Lord Jesus, says that you are the truth. You are the way, the truth, and the life. And nobody comes to the Father but through you. And so, Lord Jesus, I pray that truth would become solid in our hearts. Despite what everybody else believes. It doesn't matter what everybody else believes. But what matters is our faith and our relationship with the true God. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So this